Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. So viewers could see you saying that's true, as the president talked about the different hires that would have been possible with that legislation. What were you thinking in that moment?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was listening to the president, obviously, as he was walking through, and I could hear some of my colleagues around me saying none of that's true. And I was actually listening to the president and said, no, that part actually is true. It would have hired all those additional agents. It would have expedited the process. It would have also changed the asylum standard so we can go through much faster. The only way to be able to solve this problem right now legally is to be able to change the asylum standard and to be able to have much faster hearings. The problem is the president also left out some of the things that he could do right now. He's choosing not to do. He has a very open parole system that literally thousands of people a day are coming across and being rapidly paroled. He is not actually doing the what's called the last in, first up for hearings to be able to deter people from coming across by having faster hearings in the process. So there are multiple executive actions for whatever reason the president's choosing not to do, but there's also legal authorities that need to be done as well.
You endorsed Donald Trump this week, right after his Super Tuesday win in the Oklahoma primary, among others. Was it at all difficult to support Donald Trump after he essentially was responsible for killing your legislation? He smeared the bill. He lied about the bill, legislation you worked hard on, and you believe would not only improve the situation at the border, would maybe even save lives. Did you have any compunctions about it?
Yeah, it is frustrating because there's so much misinformation that came out. But supporting Donald Trump against Joe Biden at this point, seeing the two sets of policies could not be more stark, where we have the highest number of illegal crossings under President Trump was less than 1 million. We're now pushing 3 million with President Biden. To see the way that President Trump enforced the border and worked on national security versus how President Biden, under the exact same set of laws, is actually doing that. There's just no contest between the two of which one's more focused on national security issues, which one's more focused on actually securing the border. So there's no contest between the two. Obviously, President Trump is running for president right now. He wants this to be able to stay a major focus during the course of the rest of the year so people can see the stark contrast of that. My focus is, and the reason I'm continuing to be able to work on a bill and legislation right now is no matter who is president this year, next year, or 10 years from now, we do have gaps in our asylum law that need to be fixed. So no matter who is president, that can actually be resolved and we can have a faster resolution to be able to secure the nation.
Do you have any real hope for any serious border legislation? I understand your point about President Biden and executive action, but this looked like the best chance for a conservative, at least conservative-leaning border bill, and Republicans in the House wouldn't take yes for an answer. They demanded that it include remain in Mexico and other things that you weren't able to get in your negotiation. And so Republicans in the Senate wouldn't even vote on it. I mean, is there really any hope?
All right. I don't think there's any hope in this year on trying to be able to move real action that would really make a difference on the border like what this bill was. Interestingly enough, you mentioned the Remain in Mexico piece. It was actually protected. President Biden could do Remain in Mexico right now. In fact, a court has ordered him to leave that process in place. So that process is in place. That policy could be actually implemented right now. Again, that's one of the executive actions that President Biden chooses not to be able to enforce. There are a lot of things he could do. As I've reminded the president and his team, President Obama enforce the border much better than President Biden did with the exact same set of laws. If President Biden doesn't want to enforce it the way President Trump did, at least enforce it like President Obama did. President Obama, his high years were about 500,000 people. Again, we're at 3 million people under President Biden. If President Biden would just enforce it the same way President Obama did or President Trump did, this would be a very different border and a very different situation in cities like New York and Chicago and Denver and all over the country where they are crying out for the president to enforce the law.
President Biden announced that the U.S. military will be building a new temporary pier off the coast of Gaza to try to get more shipments of aid, of food, water, medicine to civilians, many of whom, as you know, are on the brink or are dying of starvation. You have said you want to protect all civilian life. Do you support this new pier?
Right. I do. What my biggest question right now, Jake, is who is actually inspecting what's actually going onto that pier and going in? This has been one of the challenges for a long time. Is the whatever is heading into Gaza, is it additional weapons? Is it additional supplies that are actually for humanitarian reasons or for war fighting? So my concern is not getting aid to them. Absolutely, we need everybody in the region, especially, to be able to step up and to be able to provide assistance to everyone we possibly can to be able to protect innocent civilian lives. But I also want to make sure that shipment, when it comes in, there is real inspection that's actually happening to make sure that we're not getting additional war-making supplies to make a bad situation worse.
Another major issue making headlines right now is that Alabama Supreme Court decision that a fertilized egg, an embryo, is a human being. You said that there's no controversy over IVF, in vitro fertilization, that there's wide support for IVF across the entire Congress. I just have to ask you, as just genuine curiosity, IVF often results in the discarding of fertilized eggs. How can anyone who believes that life begins at the moment of conception, that life begins at the moment of fertilization, how can anyone who says that support IVF?
Yeah, so the IVF conversation is a difficult moral conversation for a lot of families, where families are very focused on, I can't have a child, I want to be able to have a child. This is a technology that allows that. So a lot of individual families that are very passionate about protecting the life of every single child will be careful on actually how many eggs are being fertilized so that they can make sure that that's actually a child that's there, that's actually going through the process and actually being delivered. I actually personally know people that are in the process of adopting fertilized eggs that are currently being frozen, that they as a family can't have children, so they're literally adopting someone else's fertilized eggs that are not going to be used so that that child can actually come into life. For those of us that are passionate about life, we're passionate about every single life in the process. And we want to be able to have those children actually come into life and to be able to enjoy life like everyone else can. So this is a life issue. It's a great conversation for us to be able to have as a country. But I don't know of any state of anywhere, including Alabama, that immediately stepped in and said what happened in those IVF clinics was an overreaction. So they wanted to be able to fix that liability issue where they're back to actually having that ongoing process again in Alabama, as they have in multiple other states, including my own. So this issue is a life issue for us to be able to talk about. When is a life a life? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good conversation. Quite frankly, I think it's a wise conversation to be able to talk about it. Let's value every single life. I don't think some children are valuable and some children are disposable. I think every child is valuable.
So daylight savings time hit overnight, requiring you, me, and everybody responsible for this show to get up at least emotionally an hour earlier. Why you want to end daylight savings time, right? Why do you want to do it? What are the chances that it can pass Congress?
Well, I hope we can keep the conversation going on this to actually pass Congress. As you know, 2 years ago in the Senate, this passed in the Senate, then the House never took it up. Let's start the dialogue. I know there's arguments between North and South, whether we should have standard time, daylight savings time, where it should be. My issue is lock the clock. Let's not have the back and forth on this. This has come up so many times with folks that are moms, that their little kids don't make that shift. Whether you're in agriculture, it's hard to be able to make that shift. And quite frankly, it's the funniest this sounds is, several years ago, I was walking in a Veterans Day parade, and a veteran I saw on that was watching the parade, an older gentleman gets up from his lawn chair. He actually walked into the parade route, shook my hand, and said, "Before I die, would you end daylight savings time?" And I laughed in the middle of this parade route and said, "Of all the things I thought you would say to me today, that is not what I thought you would say." He said, "I hate it. I'm in my 80s. I want you to get rid of daylight savings time before I die." And I said, "Sir, I actually have a bill with Marco Rubio to do exactly that. We want to be able to lock this clock." A lot of people are annoyed by it. It's a relic of World War I, actually, when we were trying to save lamp oil. Let's actually flick our lights on, and we can do this. In Arizona, they've done this for years, and somehow their kids are still getting to school on time. Commerce is still happening. And today in Arizona, they're not waking up with a clock that's messed up.
I'm not going to make you pick a fight with anybody in the House this morning, this early morning, but I think you need to talk to some of the Washington State Republicans that have power in the House of Representatives, Kathy McMorris Rogers, because she and others, they don't want to go back So maybe maybe a conversation for you to have at another time. Go back after church today. Maybe go catch up on your sleep. Good to see you, Senator Lankford. Thanks for joining us.